In our last mini lecture, we had started looking at the constitutions, plural, of the United States. And what we were focusing on was the prior to the current constitution, the different constitutions and the philosophic backgrounds that got to them, right? And so we talked about our relationship with the British Constitution and the issues of taxation without representation, which led to the Declaration of Independence, and then ultimately that being influenced by Locke, and therefore also being influenced by Hobbes, the idea that we don't want anarchy, and so we need to have the Articles of Confederation. And we had finished last time taking a look at why anyone would want to move away from the Articles of Confederation, and we saw that there were two major issues. And so where we pick up in this mini lecture is we want to take a look at the Constitutional Convention. So a number of individuals end up pushing and pressuring for amendments to the Articles of Confederation. And so in May 1787, 29 delegates will be selected by the state governments. And their goal is to revise the Articles of Confederation. But in fact, the very first things that they end up doing is, well, one, they pick George Washington to preside over the convention so that he could remain nonpartisan. And they also kind of agree, look, the Articles of Confederation are inherently flawed, and we need to create a new system. So, you know that whole revise thing we were elected to do? Ditch that. It's time to start thinking about a new constitution. And so out of the Constitutional Convention will come the Constitution with which you're familiar, minus any of the amendments, which includes what we call the Bill of Rights, which are the very first 10 amendments to the Constitution. So, what are the things with which there were people who agreed and disagreed? Because the Constitutional Convention is not, everybody agreed about moving beyond the Articles of Confederation. Everybody agreed that Washington should be the president, meaning of the Constitutional Convention. But that wasn't where they all stopped. They also all thought we needed a more powerful national government. One of the things that all of the framers were kind of worried about was a weak government that would lead to Hobbesian anarchy. That was a big deal, and everyone there agreed. Now, how far it should go, how powerful the national government should be was a point of debate, but that it needed to be more powerful was not really a major point of debate. The other, and this might sound funny, was that there was this unified fear of pure majorities. In other words, we don't want a pure democratic system. And this is definitely a holdover from the thinking of Aristotle, right? The idea that we need a balanced form of government, not a democratic form of government. A democratic form of government will once again lead to anarchy. Now, that's what we agreed about. But there was a bunch of things the constitutional framers disagreed about. And the first of these is going to be the issue of representation. Who gets represented? Should every state get one vote? Should it be based on population? Who should count? And this led into another big issue that was the elephant in the room that no one wanted to confront, and that was slavery. Do slaves count as people? At least for the idea of population? Do they not? Should we ban it? Oops, I apologize. Should we ban it? Those were some big issues. Meanwhile, we have the issue of the presidency. We were not particularly happy with King George III. We saw him as being an issue. But shouldn't we have some kind of executive? But how should we vote for them? Should there be a singular person who is president? And all of these are going to end up in some really, long debates and conflicts. As a matter of fact, it's going to take months to resolve many of these questions, such as the presidency, which won't get resolved until the very, very end of the convention. Eventually, though, there emerge a couple of major proposals out of the Constitutional Convention, and the first of these is called the Virginia Plan. The Virginia, or sometimes called the Large State Plan, argued that there needed to be a bicameral legislature, and that means that there's two chambers. There should be a Senate and there should be a House. The lower chamber, the House, should be picked by the people, direct representation, and that the House would then vote for the Senate. So indirectly, therefore, in this plan, the people would actually be voting for everybody. The other thing that the proponents of the Virginia Plan argued is that the executive branch should be a singular presidency. In other words, it should be a unitary, one person, and that this person would be chosen by both the Senate and the House. So there was kind of a hierarchy to it, right? So people vote for the House, who votes for the Senate, who votes for the presidency. The other, and this was a huge deal, was to say that there should be a national legislative supremacy, meaning that laws that Congress pass trump state laws. Quite the move. A second plan that emerged that was in competition to this was called the New Jersey Plan, or sometimes called the Small State Plan. The New Jersey Plan said the legislature should be unicameral. There should just be one, and it should be pretty much kind of like a Senate. Each state gets a fixed number of votes or seats. The executive should be plural. There should actually be 3 presidents. And this way, by having a committee structure, you need 2 out of the 3 in order to pass laws and other kinds of legislations that come from the state senates. The other thing that was unique about this plan was that there be a judiciary, that there should be some kind of court. And this court should have the power to strike down laws. So we can see there's some major tension going on between the New Jersey and the Virginia plans. What will eventually occur is what's called the Connecticut Compromise. The Connecticut Compromise. The Connecticut Compromise said, okay, look, we're going to have a bicameral legislature. Let's do a House and a Senate. But the House will be picked by people, and senators will be picked by states. Let's give this body, which collectively is Congress, some broad powers. Let's have a judiciary. But they can't strike down laws, but instead we'll have a national supremacy clause that says the Constitution is supreme. Oops. And as a matter of fact, this will be the major outline of our Constitution today. The Connecticut Compromise will basically more or less become our Constitution. And the only big thing that will change is that the 17th Amendment will end up changing the way that we elect senators and stop having states do it and start having people do it. But we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Out of the Constitutional Convention, we get 6 key elements. And it's easy when you're talking about all the things that come out of the Constitutional Convention to miss the 6 key elements. In other words, it's easy to miss the forest for the trees. And we're just going to briefly touch on each of these 6, and that will end our mini lecture today. The first is we get elected government. Now that might seem small, but it's actually a big deal. We're going to be the first country in the world to have basically all positions elected. Oops, I apologize. I'm just switching things every time. Other countries still had monarchs and heredity, meaning that you had monarchs that were by birth. We also had this idea of federalism. This is what makes our country so complex. As a matter of fact, we offer 2 classes in it, American government and state and local government. We divvied government between 2 levels. There's a national government with its own constitution and rules, and there are state governments with their own constitutions and their own rules. So if you really want to understand American government, you have to understand both of these things. And even at Daytona State, we have to split these into 2 separate areas, national and state. If you're ever interested, you can take my state and local government class as well. The third thing that we get out of this, out of the Constitution, is limited government, right? This concept that comes to us from Locke and is now enshrined in the Constitution that says that states can't coerce however they want. There are limits to their power. And there's things it can do and there's things that it can't do. The fourth one, and this is always bizarre, is we set up a non-majoritarian system. That means majorities don't win. In fact, it's designed so majorities have a lot of way to not win. And we want, in the system, the Constitution is designed to check what's called the tyranny of the majority. That minorities need to have rights and the ability to stand up against majorities. You don't want the mob to rule. So we don't actually end up with a democracy in that sense. We end up with a kind of republic. And we'll talk more about that as the semester goes on. The fifth thing is we end up with separation of power. So not only do we divide power between the state and the national government with federalism, we also divide the national government up into a bunch of branches. So you get a president, you get a Congress, you get courts. And none of these ones are ultimately powerful. They're each struggling and fighting with the others for what they want to do. And this is a new way of thinking about things. And the sixth, often overlooked, is the Constitution basically created a free trade zone. Now, I don't mean this in a global sense, right? We weren't having free trade with the whole world here. But we went from colonists, where states were imposing taxes and different currencies on each other, and import and export taxes and all kinds of barriers from one state to the other, and we did away with all of that in one stroke with the Constitution. As a matter of fact, one of the things that probably leads to the technological leapfrogging the United States experiences over other countries, including the United Kingdom, during an era when the United Kingdom, we just said, was this dominant, nearly superpower, is this free economy, this ability to trade and to build, and over a huge continent. That's a big, big deal, and it'll have major international power ramifications as a result. So the 6 key elements that will come out of the Constitution are elected government, federalism, limited government, a non-majoritarian system, separation of powers, and a free economy. In the next mini lecture, we're going to go through and take a look at the Constitution itself, some of the major articles and portions of it, and then that's going to end our series on the Constitution's of the United States.